Good morning and welcome to this development dialogue. Dr. Saul Levine, esteemed panelists, members of the audience and online participants. I would like to welcome you to the 10th TIPS Development Dialogue session this year, the 10th session, focusing on technological change and innovation in industrial policy. I would like to refresh your memory on the content of this development dialogue. It will look at how manufacturers confront new technological possibilities to innovate and compete. While technologies are often discussed at conferences, strategy workshops, and in the media, industries seldom work together with their supporting organizations to experiment with new solutions or to build new competencies that strengthen their competitive advantage. However, there are exceptions. A handful of companies in each sector develop the new technological competencies that allow them to expand into new markets. What can we learn from these new initiatives, and how can we mobilize some of the more risk-averse or lagging industries and their supporting institutions to explore new possibilities? So as we gather together, we are very familiar with the concepts of science, technology, and innovation and industrial policy. The Department of Science, Technology, and Innovation, that is formally the new name since 2 October, emphasizes and focuses on leveraging the contribution of science, technology, and innovation to achieve sustainable and inclusive South African development in a changing world. The department has many funding instruments to actively transform the science system, to build the national system of innovation in terms of scientific infrastructure, advanced postgraduate skills, to fund technology development, to help commercialize technology, to protect intellectual property rights, to establish pilot plants and fund technology platforms that help to provide technological support to firms and to help ensure that technology diffusion takes place in the country and across firms. We also note that innovation is not only the domain of the DSTI. Indeed, the white paper on STI took a much broader approach to innovation, going beyond the classical R&D as a source of innovation by focusing on, for example, grassroots innovation, open source innovation, or open innovation, and so forth. There are many publications defining the positive relationships between science, technology, and innovation investment and industrial development, economic growth, advanced skills development, development of high technology industries, and so forth. However, we also know that the time to impact and the level of impact of these STI investments are often delayed due to demand-side variables such as absorptive capacity and market forces, and supply-side variables, for example, the time to mature the technology or the available funding, etc. And furthermore, the measuring of those outcomes and the impact of the science, technology, and innovation investments remain a very difficult and often intangible task. In the above framework, technological change can also be considered as an outcome of STI investment. So STI investment is then an input, and technological change that we're discussing today is one of the outcomes. However, investments in STI or the outputs from STIs are but one of the factors impacting on technological change. The panelists will today share their knowledge on the topic of technological change and innovation in industrial policy, especially on the drivers of technological change. For example, is it only STI that drives this technological change? Furthermore, is this technological change an intentional outcome that should be included as perhaps a management indicator in our industrial or science policy documents? And if so, how can we account for that? In our discussion, we can also focus on the firm level or try to detect trends at the sectoral or cluster level. So whilst the exceptions or examples are at the firm level, as we will see soon, the focus at industrial policy level is to maximize the learning across the sectoral level of firms so as to impact and optimize the impact of the potential industrial policy interventions and the associated support instruments. So that is just the introductory scene-setting comments. I would now like to hand over to Mr. Lucas Mtembu, who is a researcher at TIPS, to give us his perspective based on his paper on technological change in capital goods. Thank you, Mr. Mtembu.
Thank you. I'll be presenting on technological change in the capital goods industry. Okay. So the framing of the paper, we linked the capital goods industry to the mining industry in South Africa because it mainly supplies the mining sector. So you'll see as I go through it, it's mainly linked to the mining industry. So the outline will look at drivers of technological change, automation in mining equipment. We look at IoT in pumps, IoT in lifting and handling equipment. We look at some of the technological trends in South Africa, and then we'll conclude with some of the key takeaways. Okay, so some of the drivers for technological change include digitalization, which is internet connectivity enabling the collection and sharing of data, as well as remote monitoring and control of operations. The rise in environmental concerns also encourage decarbonization, with carbon taxes seeking to lower greenhouse gas emissions. The manufacturing industry is manufacturing of machinery is energy intensive, with companies making investments in solar generation and battery storage. There's also rising demands from consumers for environmentally friendly products. We've seen that mining companies are shifting towards buying electric trucks from original equipment manufacturers. In 2023, there was a surge in global sales of electric trucks by 35% from the previous year. The shift from diesel-powered trucks to electric trucks is suitable for areas with strict emissions regulations. Occupational health and safety regulations have also driven technological change within the capital goods industry. With the then Department of Natural Resources and DMRE has amended the Mining Health and Safety Act in 2017. It now requires trackless mobile machinery in mining operations to be fitted with tracking technology to avoid collisions. TTMs are now fitted with sensors and collisions avoidance systems. Okay, so looking at automation in mining equipment, duct ramps either have a manual or an automatic transmission. In a manual transmission, a driver usually shifts gears using a gear lever and a clutch in a manual dump truck, compared to an automatic dump truck where gears are shifted automatically, and then the driver focuses on steering and loading. Both of these are laborious and unpredictable. Komatsu in 2008 launched their autonomous haulage systems. It operates autonomous dump trucks, including loading, hauling, and dumping. It has improved safety, operational efficiency, and profits for mining companies. Rio Tinto's Pilbara iron ore mine in Australia bought 80 driverless trucks from Komatsu in 2008. We've seen that the technological change in mining is headed towards autonomous mining operations. The Syama gold mine in Mali became the first fully automated gold mine in 2019. Sandvik supplied Syama with a complete set of autonomous equipment and digital solutions. This included a fleet of Sandvik dump trucks, autonomous drills, and fully autonomous loaders. These are remotely controlled and monitored. So looking at the Internet of Things in pumps, an IoT-based pump monitoring system is a network of connected devices that analyzes and monitors pumps in real time. It collects information from pumps and sends it to a centralized system for fault identification, performance forecasting, and optimization. Operators remotely monitor and operate smart pumps. And stormwater management systems uses these pumps to reduce water runoff. In mining operations, pumps are used to remove underground water, to transport slurry, and to pump water for processing. IoT pumps optimizes these processes. So looking at the Internet of Things in lifting and handling equipment, IoT sensors are integrated into overhead equipment for remote monitoring and control. IoT sensors are linked through a local network, wirelessly transmitting data to operators and OEMs via a cloud computing system. Lifting and handling equipment was previously required a technician to connect a laptop or a tablet to a crane to retrieve data for a page download. Cranes are now fitted with IoT technology, now allow for instant access to information, with some of these older cranes being fitted with new technology. So looking at some of the technological trends in South Africa, better equipment in March 2023, their articulate dump trucks were in the adoption stage. The Mogalakwena Platinum mine in Mokopane, Limpopo, acquired an electric rope shovel from Komatsu in April 2024. This electric rope shovel has lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to diesel-powered excavators. The Plasberg lithium and tantalum mine in the Northern Cape was in the process of buying 2 sensor-based ore sorting plants from Raiders International Technologies. The Plasberg mine commissioned an X-ray fluorescent ore sorter to advance its processing capacity and increase production. Sensors and sorting equipment identify and separate concentrates from waste, with spodumene recoveries having improved by 89%. So to conclude my presentation, some of the key takeaways are that the drivers of technological change in the capital goods industry include digitalization, environmental concerns, and occupational health and safety regulations. The mining industry is experiencing a shift from autonomous mining operations because of technological advancements. New technologies have improved safety and operational efficiency, and this is owed to remote monitoring and control. And automated industrial processes are replacing some of the jobs and therefore require new skills. Workers would now require upskilling, reskilling, and training to use digital technologies or to transition into new roles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mthembu. I did not explain the process up front, so I'd like to now give just a quick opportunity for clarification questions to Mr. Mthembu. At the end of all the inputs from the panel members, we're going to have a discussion. But at this stage, if there are some uncertainties that you wish to clarify through a question, the floor is open for some clarification questions. Thank you. It doesn't seem like that. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mampiswana for his input. Thank you.
Thanks, Beeuwen. And yeah, thanks for the earlier presentation. So I'm gonna share some reflections, I think largely from my industrial experience, both at Sasol and Nafasi Water, just to give some perspectives on, you know, some of the observations on how we have looked at technological change at firm level, so that we can appreciate what firms looked at and what are some of the dynamics, and then at the end I'll draw some views from an industrial policy implications point of view. yeah, and hopefully we can then pick up as part of the debate. I think first and foremost, I like to look at these things from 3 layers in terms of the reflections. So I level them level 1 up to level 3, just my own conceptualization to guide the conversation. And I think right at the start, at what I consider to be level 1, right, firms are looking to, increase efficiency. They've got a technology stack that is allowing them to drive what they're currently doing. And part of the drivers in terms of technological change in what I capture at the lowest level is that they want to drive efficiency, right? And a big part of the efficiency, and I think the previous speaker spoke about some of these things, is what I'll coin or consider as technological upgrading. And really, these are new technologies in the same domain, and all we're trying to do is how do we shift the organization from where it is to operate better, to deliver faster. And really, it is in the realm of trying to do more with less in some of the instances. And I think the bulk of what organizations are trying to do at each moment is how can they exploit what already exists. And then level 2, it's really about creating alternate value. And I use the example of waste beneficiation, and this is largely from the work that I've been part of at Nafasi Water, where you understand that there is a limit on the efficiency space. I mean, at some point you reach certain limit, whether from a skills point of view, whether from the knowledge at that particular time in terms of what you can do more. And really the next phase out of that is how do you then create alternative value? And I think a big part of this then is you actually then need to augment different technologies into your field. And I think and that's why I'm using the example of waste beneficiation as an example, where you originally a water company where you previously just discharged your waste stream for incineration or into a landfill. But as part of this, the creation of an alternate value, you then figure out how to augment a new range of technologies that allow you to process that particular stream and then be able to deliver value and being able to access parts of the market that you previously could not. And part of the capabilities for these is being able to access and work with a combination of new and existing technologies, that allow you to enter a new sector or the domain. So in the start, you were not engaging in such technologies, but all of a sudden, when you are now expanding into this alternate value, you then part of your capabilities is being able to grow new capabilities around these different tech and that different technologies. And I think then the last part is really on. So even the alternate value part has a limit, right? And the question then is when you do reach such limits, and I think there's been a big conversation around also the circular economy that in some instances, part of, the cost of driving all of that effort sometimes just does not make sense to even go through that particular. And I think we need to do the necessary assessment to understand whether in some of these instances it makes sense for you to be able to do that or consider other options. I think the last part really is on you being able to create new value altogether, where a big part of this is how do you then go ahead and create new technologies altogether. And part of this is the capabilities is on entirely new or unproven technologies. And I think this is a big challenge from an industrial policy point of view, in that the technologies, you are not able to do a typical NPV estimate because that market currently does not exist. How do you then make an investment in something that at that particular moment, because the market is new, because the technology is unproven, some of the financial indicators that you traditionally use in an existing and known market are quite limited. And the question is, how do you then make some of those explorations? And I think going further to look at elements of risk and investment and also the return on investment, still on the level 1 to 3, when you are in the domain of just driving efficiency, obviously the risk is lower, right? You already know that you've got customers. You already understand the kind of market that you're dealing with. And if there are no significant changes, risk in terms of those investments, you are pretty comfortable that you are making investment to continue capturing the market and making certain expansion around an already existing market. Then in terms of the investment, because obviously you're not changing your entire fleet, you are adding some of the digital technologies there and there. You're already investing in what exists. So your investment is on the lower end when you compare to perhaps when one has to make an investment on level 3. The return on investment is short term. I mean, the expectation here is in a space of 6 to 18 months, one is able to bring back that particular return. Then when you move to level 2, and I've just used the framing of low to high just to give a particular indication, obviously not in terms of absolute numbers. But I think the key thing in terms of the trend is that as you go to level 3, where you now need to develop new technologies, the risk is higher. Right? That particular technology is unproven, has got things that from a technical advancement point of view needs to be understood further. So as such, the risk of deploying such a technology is on the higher end. And I think also going through the investment part and the return on investment, you will find yourself investing a lot more for that new fleet of technologies. And also in terms of the return on investment, it's not something that you will invest and expect to get a return in 3 years. I think typically this can range into a 5 to 10 year window, obviously sector and technology dependent as well. And I think part of the key here is on the basis that it takes longer to get the return on investment, you actually want to see yourself making these investments on a regular basis, not something that you wake up because now you have come to the end of the lifespan of a particular technology, and now you want to initiate that longer term investment. You'll find that by that time you have probably missed the boat. And I think I want to make a quick shift in terms of what all of us have observed over the years, obviously not necessarily from a local point of view. If one goes back to when we had, the Nokia 3310 as an example, as a piece of technology that one button required you to press it 3 times to be able to now, issue an SMS or whatever you wanted to write. Right? Obviously, Nokia made a lot of investment in that. At the time, I think Nokia had about 156 R&D labs across the world. I mean, they were quite invested in the technology, right? Then what then BlackBerry did said, but no, we want to invest our efforts in figuring out how to move away from a single button that gives you 3 letters to a single button that gives a single letter. So obviously, from a targeting point of view, while Nokia continued to make their investment better on their fleet, BlackBerry then changed the conversation to say, but no, actually, you don't need to continue struggling with one button that needs to give you 3 letters. We will now give you one button that gives you a letter, and of course, a bigger screen as well. So from a technology point of view, there was that targeted R&D investment that aimed to solve that particular piece. And obviously, BlackBerry came and made a lot more investment in terms of figuring that out. And then the Apple team then came and said, no, but actually you don't need a button. So from a technical point of view, then the Apple team focused on how do you then make sure that I can use a phone without a button, right? While BlackBerry continued to go deeper and deeper in making one button work better or whatever it is, iPhone said, no, but we're not investing in that. Our R&D investment is to figure out that the particular button is no longer part of the conversation as you know it in the physical format. And I think really this part of what evolved in that particular sector shows you how you can continue driving efficiency while others are looking at something entirely different, that there is a limitation in terms of what your efficiency investment does. There is a limitation in terms of what your alternate value does. Ultimately is how, when you understand the particular limit, you are then able to move into a different phase. I do want to close out the conversation on both Nokia and BlackBerry in saying that part of what we generally don't have a conversation about is how these organizations shift outside of when they have lost. And I think I was actually with Beeuwen in 2019 when we went to Finland. And Nokia, as an example, has used the same capabilities to move into the 5G space. I've recently learned that BlackBerry as well have used the same capability to move into the cybersecurity space. But I know it's something that doesn't get a lot of press, but these organizations actually, at some point, they accepted that they've lost and they've moved on to make progress in other areas. I think Nokia is number 3 from a 5G point of view with Ericsson and Huawei. And I think that's an important thing to understand as well, that a loss in a particular sector is not necessarily that you have lost entirely. It's a matter of how can you shift those capabilities to move forward. So I think with that, a few tentative remarks from an industrial policy point of view. I think when on the basis that you have got these, 3 levels or these 3 portfolios that one has to think about, your industrial policy has to be differentiated and has to be risk-based because you're not dealing with the same thing. If you want to help organizations drive efficiency, and at that moment it makes sense to drive efficiency, then the question is, how do you then make sure that they are well supported to be able to move forward? Access to the latest technologies, access to whatever that they need for them to be able to drive efficiency. Then the other aspect in terms of industrial policy, when one makes a reflection on this, is that technological and innovation capability building are at the heart of industrial policy, if one is to be honest. You cannot be talking about industrial policy while not making a consideration on technological and innovation capability building. Whether we're looking at sectoral master plans, part of the key thing is how do we upgrade those sectors through technology and also through innovation as well. And I think the part that I showed around Nokia, BlackBerry, and Apple signifies the need for targeted R&D investment to say, this is what we want to solve for. We want to solve for a car that moves in this particular way. We want to solve for a manufacturing that performs in a particular way. It's not just saying we want to understand the entire sector, but there are certain things that we want to solve for. And I think there's a need to have such clarity and also understanding, are we doing that for existing sectors or are we doing that for new sectors? Because it's not always the same achievement that you want to have at the end. And I think the last part to also echo a part of what Beeuwen said earlier on is really on industrial policy and innovation policy are highly intertwined. And I think this is emerging a lot more in a number of the debates that we have, in that you actually cannot talk about industrial policy without talking about innovation policy, vice versa. That as much as at a national level, you've got 2 separate departments for executing work, but in reality, these 2 things are highly intertwined, and we need to continue appreciating how we make them operate in that manner. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mampiswana. Can I ask if there's any clarification questions towards Dr. Mampiswana? The example of Nokia is fascinating because the technological change to change into 5G is maybe part of what we need to understand, is that ability to change into something related but very different. So I think our next speaker then, if there's no questions, is Dr. Shawn Cunningham. He's a process consultant working in the field of innovation and competitiveness in the private sector. So over to you, Dr. Cunningham.
Thank you very much. So I thought that I'm going to start by telling you my 7 observations before I share the slides so that I don't go down a rabbit hole somewhere along the line. But I want to frame my conversation and my observations from a project that I'm running with TIPS, that we call the Technological Change and Innovation System Observatory. It's where we're really trying to focus on technological change that is broad. So, okay, so I need to frame this conversation. Firstly, we are talking of the manufacturing sector. I think this is important to frame our conversation in the manufacturing sector, innovation in financial services and in tourism. And this is very different to the manufacturing sector and the kind of investments that companies have to make and the risks that a manufacturer take when they change something even small in their business. The second comment that I want to make before I start my presentation is about technologies in the plural. We often talk of technologies in the singular, but we don't pay attention to the fact that technologies also change in families. They are intertwined with many other technologies. So even in Rendani's presentation, the change from one kind of phone to the next kind of phone, it's called technological change because many things had to change. It wasn't just the keyboard. There were many things that changed. Supply changed, the way that the phones were even maintained and upgraded. And there were lots of things changing. And that's for me important to just frame the conversation to say, when we talk of technological change, we're not talking of a singular change. We're talking of these change, and many of those changes goes beyond the company where we're trying to observe the change. So it requires supply chains and so on. So here are my 7 observations. The first observation is that, and it's maybe an opening statement, is that we have to improve our ability to create a collective or distributed understanding of technological change and what it means. The second observation is that very often sector strategies or industry strategies, and dare I say even some of the master plans, often discuss and explore technological change and its consequences. But then during implementation, we mainly talk of skills development or developing, again, a singular technology or so. And we don't have this embracing technological change as an opportunity to maybe even reposition ourselves. The third observation is it's very expensive for most of our manufacturers to scan multiple technology and market horizons. Technologies and markets go together. When you choose the one, you automatically make choices for the other. So there's a relationship between these two things. My fourth observation is that we often underestimate the importance of building complementary or co-specialized capabilities. Again, it ties to my statement that when a single company wants to make a change, they very often have to get other people to move with them. And in Rendani's presentation, when you go into an uncertain new domain, it means I have to convince other people to take a risk because I can't do it alone. And South Africa, in my experience, is one of the more difficult places to do this. My fifth observation is that public sector technology support is often generic and responsive. I checked with Beeuwen if I can say this before the time. But again, in my experience, many of our public sector technology support is very responsive. Somebody has to go and explain their problem before they get a solution. If they can find the person who they can complain to. My sixth observation is technology change is often seen as an outcome. We measure it after it happened. It's not seen as an orientation to the world and as an orientation to solving problems. And then lastly, it is assumed that all firms use the same technology in the same way. And this is not true. And Anton, with the plastic sector, you can tell even when a technology is established, like plastic conversion, when you go to the individual firms, they all use the technology slightly differently. So just to the weakness of the sector approach is we assume that because companies stand up when we ask a sector to stand up, that they're all doing it in the same way. Now I can show you the observations with some pictures. This is a picture of by a colleague of mine, Simon Wardley in the UK, where the healthcare industry together explored how technologies are changing so that they can take proactive strategies to position themselves based on how technologies are expected to evolve. Technological change is not a surprise. We can actually predict how technologies are going to change. Yet we often use language like disruption. We say people are disrupted. That's a very passive thing. You basically wait to be disrupted. It drives me up the wall. Often technologies are described as objects, as things, and we forget that the more difficult thing about technology is organizing people. It's getting people to share information, to share observations, to think out loud together. So technologies change in predictable patterns. It's not like we are completely surprised about what comes next. We can in this room sit together and I don't want to say fantasize, but dream about what is coming next with AI, and we can start working on a strategy in anticipation. We don't have to wait for open AI to launch the next thing. The second thing is about the sector strategies that's often focused on the challenges and the threats. And I really want to push the emphasis here to say, well, we should more often talk about what is possible, more often talk about what do we have in place that can be repurposed, maybe even recognizing what do we have in place beyond our firm that exists in other firms or in the public sector or in our research institutions. What I find we don't talk about often enough is which competencies should we really invest in? And with a competence, I do not mean send people for training. A competence is an ability of a group of people to perform a function reliably. So, we can say that we have a competence to use digital design in our operations if we know that we can ask the digital design team to do something or to change something, those kind of competencies. And the last point that is very sensitive to discuss in South Africa is how do we coordinate investments? How do we get multiple companies and the public sector to invest at the right time? It's amazing that our companies are all doing this pretty much by themselves. I mentioned it's expensive to scan multiple horizons. And the thing is that in every one of our industries, we have companies that are playing on the world stage. Those with the deep pockets can afford to rely on their suppliers and maybe international fairs and maybe even leading global customers to get ideas for new technologies or new opportunities. But for most of our manufacturers, they actually rely on off-the-shelf technologies. They actually, in many instances, rely on proven technologies. So Rendani, your point that you said, when you try something new, there's risk. A lot of our manufacturers know they have to change, but they're not taking that risk. And I think it's because of the costs of doing this by yourself. I just want to highlight something about research that we did as TIPS 2 years ago with the Meseta, where we looked at how do companies find out what they can change, what is possible. And a lot of their information came from their associations, trade magazines, and equipment suppliers. And it was amazing because higher education institutions, the science councils, research consultancies, whatever, all of those other things came very far down the list. Just to maybe highlight that. The costs to find capacities in other firms and even in the public sector is very high. Our search and discovery costs are very high. And one of the reasons is that in many instances, the capabilities in the public sector are described very generically. But actually, the bigger challenge is that our companies are mainly focused on their supply chain and not so much on building the alliances to enter new markets. Right, so there are many overlaps between our public sector support organizations, and at the same time, there are also gaps. I must just add, we have excellent public sector technology capability, so I'm not complaining about the quality. My concern is more the access to these capabilities and that it's sometimes so hard to find a technology capability somewhere funded with public funding and to access that. It's sometimes very hard, and it means that many of our leading companies actually reach overseas for technology extension support because it's so difficult to find out locally where to find help. Hidden in all of that text, there's a point about public funded technology promotion is often aimed at individual firms, and it's not often enough focused at upgrading sectors. And with upgrading sectors, it's about making sectors competitive. I remember many years ago working with food technology, where the technology center was measured about the upgrading of the whole value chain, the whole food technology sector, not just measuring the change in individual companies, but looking at the sector as a whole. Okay, so there on the right, for those of you with really sharp eyes, the one with the blue mask is Beeuwen on the picture. And we were I had to search for this picture, Beeuwen, and I could see then that you even tried to hide. We visited a foundry, and this foundry is a foundry is an old, ugly business. It's really dirty, but it's actually quite an innovative business. And in this company specifically, the owner of the company went through great lengths to get her staff to experiment and then compare results. In this photo, they're showing us something they're trying with a mold. The question is, how do we get firms like this one to work with other firms? Because everybody doing this by themselves costs our society more. So the question is, how do we incentivize companies to try and solve problems together? And of course, then from a competition law perspective, how do we make rules so that we don't have collusion, but that we have innovation? So problem solving in companies is difficult, but problem solving between companies is really critical to sector innovation. Okay, I love this quote by Peter Drucker. Neither big is better or small is beautiful makes much sense. Neither elephant nor mouse nor butterfly is in itself better or more beautiful. Size follows function. I want to now just misappropriate his quote to also say that the way companies use technologies are different. I'm asked all the time, what do I make about ChatGPT and the future of work? Well, even the same kind of company use these technologies differently. And so when people tell me digitization is driving change, no, it's not. Digitization is a tool, and one company is going to use it to communicate better, and another company is going to use that same tool to replace staff, and another company is going to use that exact same technology to fact check. And I hope that they then have humans fact checking the fact checker. But anyways, just the point is that even in the same industry, even in the same value chain, companies are using technologies very differently. What I do want to say about just taking Peter Drucker, but also recognizing what small firms are good at is not what we want for them from a policy perspective. From a technological change perspective, our small firms are often our specialists. They very often those specialists that help larger firms try new things, introduce new technologies, and access new markets. Yet in a lot of our strategies, we want small firms to be like big firms, and they are not. Small firms adopt and absorb and modify and create technology very differently to big firms. And so just in our policies and in our sector strategies to understand that small firms are very often relied upon by even large firms to understand new technologies, to reduce their risk of trying something. And I visited a huge automotive plant, and I asked them about one of their technology choices because it was obvious that they don't look like their mother company in Germany. And they said, we had to choose this technology because the specialists that do the maintenance or the robots are available in South Africa, and they're available here in Gauteng. And so a whole factory gets designed also around the kind of specialized skills that's available in one place and not in another. So to just understand, now that small business, 20 people, will never grow to 30 people. It will stay a 20-person company, but it's a highly specialized, highly competent, highly advanced company. And we shouldn't expect this business to behave like a big firm. But a big firm, German automotive company, cannot do what they do without that company being there. So just understanding the relationship between these companies. So, okay, I have framed some, but I've already made many of these recommendations as I've gone on. But just about the word technological change again. Technological change doesn't happen in just one company. It happens in networks of companies. And it most often happens between those companies and their supporting organizations. And so in our technological change observatory, we are not looking at change in companies, because that actually doesn't tell us anything about the system and how favorable the innovation system is for risk-taking or for learning. Technological change must be measured by how companies and their public support organizations and the regulators and whoever else work together to create new competitive or innovative advantages. So thank you very much. You have to click around a bit on the TIPS website to find the observatory, or you can contact us afterwards and we can tell you how to get it.
Thank you, Dr. Cunningham, for an interesting presentation. Can I ask if there's any questions or clarification to Dr. Cunningham? If not, I'm going to hand over to Ms. Nontombi Maseko from the DTIC. She's the Director of Innovation and Technology at the DTIC, and she will provide some inputs as the discussant for this dialogue. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning, colleagues. I'm looking at my panel here. They call the lady for the most difficult job. And I think it's quite exciting today that we're talking about this technological change, and we're looking in terms of how effective or how well do we do it in South Africa, and what is it that we can do from a policy perspective. So when I was preparing for this session, I wanted to look at the coin my sort of framing of the discussion around what will be the good, what will be the challenges, what is our hope, and what is it that we need to do. But before I do that, I want to just go into the presentations first, and maybe bring some of the things into an agreement that we can form a basis of where we start our discussion. So the first thing that I want to acknowledge and thank my colleagues for bringing up, especially when we're talking about firms or we're talking about specific companies, is that companies are very comprehensive structure. When you look at them, there will be their HR, there'll be infrastructure issues, technological issues, supply chain management, all these things. Some of my speakers have spoken about them one way or the other. And technological change is one thing within that, pool of many things that the company wants to be engaged in. So there will be HR systems, and this company again exists in a specific environment, might be affected by environmental aspects that are being introduced in the previous years. We've seen how greening has become important, or green production has become important for these companies, and even a political climate affects. And now you ask yourself, in terms of these technological changes that they introduce, what becomes the real driver? We try to talk about these particular drivers, but in the first presentation in particular, when you're looking at it squarely from a technological point of view, I like the fact that it was in mining. For the fact that, it would have been so interesting to juxtapose your work against what were the human resources activities that were happening at that time. because I know that one of the things that mines had big issues with at that particular time was strikes and you know, this less reliance or wanting to move away from relying on people for their operational work. So it would be very interesting to see what was the niche or what was the itch that was driving them to then say we want to automate. Was it purely technological, or were there other, you know, things at play within the organization that was necessitating that? Because the thing about companies is about bottom line. You know, companies in everything that they do, you know, they'll be sitting in a strategic plan and somebody will say, we want to introduce this technology. Maybe we want to train this number of people. And there'll be a CFO at the end of the line or the CEO saying, at the end of the year, how much does that get us as a company? You know, or how far does it get us in terms of market traction or whatever, you know, output that they want to look at. So you want to ask yourself, is technological change a pure driver, or are there other things at play? That is my first issue. And then the second one will be the ecosystem as well. The changes in the ecosystem are such that sometimes you need to pivot as a company. A company needs to then pivot, because then staying in or producing the way you were doing is no longer a suitable thing to do for what you know, environmental things are going into. So that's another issue. Now, also, what I appreciated from Shawn's presentation is the fact that when you look at also technological change or technologies, there are families of these technologies. That's one, but also, you know, you just don't change the technology. You change, you know, systems. You need to train people. There's many then, whether intended or unintended changes that need to happen, that, you know, a company that complements this change. And how so there will be two aspects for that industry to then look at, whether the change, the benefits outweigh the disruption of everything else in the value chain. And you find that, especially if you talk about digital, we had an experiment that we did with CSIR at some point, the 4IR establishment, the CSIR, where they were trying to just work with a few industries and say, okay, there's this technology around sensors that can detect, you know, the life, the life of the machine. And if you just put it there, somebody has to manage. And we got two opposing responses from that. One company was very much into, you know, this technology and wanting to know, when should I service this machine? What is the life of this machine using these sensors? And the others felt like this was disruption that they didn't need for their bottom line. You know, so at the end of the day, again, to your point, Shawn, you want to apply the same technology to different companies the same way, and that doesn't work because they have different nuances. Even in terms of their technological orientation, there will be companies that are on the step with this new developments, and there will be others that like don't disrupt my processes. Okay, then again, I've talked about. Okay, then Rendani then talked about, I like the alternative value and creation of new value. Again, that one, I link it to how these companies want to grow, to the company's growth strategy, because creation of new value and alternate value is 9 out of 10 times about the company's growth and how risk plays to ensure the sustainability of that company. So you will see that if you're talking about long-term investments, then patient capital is needed, and how does that company funds those activities becomes an issue for them. Now, to come to the policy framework or policy prescripts, and how maybe from our point of view, from the DTIC or the government, basically we are driving this, is that if you think about it, or it's already been said here, is that when we draft, we're no longer also even drafting new policies, as in creating new policies for different things. We know that innovation policy needs to drive the innovations that will be beneficial, for the industry, that will enable creation of new industries, or assist the existing industry to be sustainable, right? But in our framing of these, we're still using master plans. And one of the shortcomings of the master plans is that they are not focused enough in any particular activity that needs to be driven. So I feel like one of the things that I want to go back to when we still had IPEP. About a few years ago, I went to Malaysia, and I was presenting our industrial policy, and I outlined all the IPEP priorities at the time. And one participant in the house raised their hand and said, so what is the priority? I said, no, we have like 13 of them, and then there are cross-cutters and, the transversal ones. And then they said, but you haven't started prioritizing if you're looking at, 13 priorities as a country. That was a hard pill to swallow. And I feel like we are still in that if we are not focusing, because also the zooming, you just need to have that particular focus when we look into these things. That's the first one. Second one is the agility. I find that sometimes how we do our planning, implementation, how we review the things we do, we are not agile enough. We kind of need to go back to an experimentation kind of framework that assists us to then change or move things as we are implementing. As scientists, when I was doing my honors at Gerryts, I did an experiment in catalysis. Catalysis, if anybody knows, is very tedious. You would sit there, set up an experiment, and this drop will be dropping a little bit, and then sometimes you set it up for the whole night, and the following day, the experiment, has bonked out at 12 o'clock, and you are not getting the results that you are looking for. Now, for me, experimentation in the policy space is such that you are able to then implement in real time, test in real time, and change in real time what needs to be changed. And whatever it is that you need to change, you need to change it as if you are dealing with a complex equation where you are adding, subtracting, dividing, just doing one thing at the time, such that then you are able to do that. But I don't think we have a policy framework that assists us to do that. And that's why you'd see there's a whole transformative innovation policy agenda that's coming to say, how do we then even try to include experimentation in our policy implementation? That's the second one. Third one is around intellectual property management and how we exploit that. One of the observations that Shawn did was that, if one technology is developed in one university, how do you almost like pick it up and give it to 10, SMMEs or 10 small businesses or small firms to try it out and see if they can run with it and make something of it. So there's also that our IP management prescripts are somewhat not tight or strengthened or, geared towards driving that. The fourth one is about resourcing the plans we make. I think this point has been belabored a lot that, even if one would take one master plan and say then for us to implement and achieve the objectives of this master plan, what is needed from a financing perspective, from capabilities, technologies, what legislative framework we need to change such that this works, what standardization standards do we need to introduce, so I feel like sometimes also that's one of the things, and I think I read it in one of the tips documents in terms of how do you fully resource a master plan such that then it can be successful. And then to conclude my piece is also just to highlight also two other things which I feel like whenever we are in settings like this, it goes mentioned, but I haven't seen any movement around how we are really making this work is really around the education system, considering that if you're looking at technological changes and how they affect or they influence what happens in industry, we have lost that connectivity. In the past, your Sasols, your Prasa and your Kibelas used to have research facilities in universities that were well-resourced and well-funded. But more and more you find that as new technologies are coming in, that relationship or that linkage is getting sort of weaker and weaker, and the influence becomes less and less. So it's the entire how do we revive or put that back together to make sure that these industries thrive. And I think I'd like to end it at that. Thank you, Beeuwen. I know I said two things, I forgot the other one.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maseko. Okay, so I'd like to now move over to the dialogue discussion and open the floor for some questions from the floor. So if there's any questions or remarks from anyone in the house, please, you are welcome to proceed. I think I'm going to sit next to the colleagues. It's just easier if I sit there. Thank you.
Yeah. So my question is towards, it's for Shawn. So one of the key observations that you had made was that public support measures aren't catering for a sort of sectorial approach. So, and the other thing that you had mentioned was that companies within a sector would adopt technology differently. So then how would you suggest that public support strategies support companies that are implementing the same technology but differently? Yeah. So if you have like an example or a case study that you might know of where something like that was done, I think that would be nice for you to share.
Good afternoon. I'm just a curious mind from the medical field. So I'm Dr. Mvamadi. I just wanted to follow up on his question when it comes to public sectors, that maybe from your experiences when it comes to innovation and technological changes, I see how medicine has advanced in other countries. So when it comes to South Africa, our public sector, our healthcare system, what are your views on how can we get to implement innovation and technological changes in trying to get to a point where we are more efficient and somehow try get to a point where we are competitive or comparing with the medical standards internationally?
Anton Hanneton, plastics industry. Yeah, my question relates to the previous one. Prior years, we were quite innovative as a country, and we have lost that capability. We are not in the forefront anymore, which clearly indicate that our policies and the support is not creating an enabling environment for businesses to really explore and to develop and advance technology development. So there's various policies that will probably limit this opportunity to develop. So the question is, how can we change it? What have led us to lose that capability? And how can we change that going forward? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for those questions. Well, one of the ways that we can get some of our public investments to pay off would be through demonstration facilities, where people can go, and I can mention a few that Beeuwen's program has supported. For instance, down in Port Elizabeth, there's a chemical pilot plant, a very sophisticated pilot plant that a company making chemicals can literally make almost any kind of fluid or solid chemical product. And companies go there with their problems, and scientists and technicians can show them how to solve a particular problem. So those kind of facilities exist. The challenge is often that if you don't know that they exist, then it's hard to find them. And if you visit the university's website and you search for chemical pilot plant, you're not going to find that technology center. So that's maybe one. Another great example is down in Cape Town, the food technology station, where they have a reconfigurable food factory. So you take your grandmother's recipe for chutney or whatever, and you want to figure out how to make this, 2,000 kilograms of chutney, which is slightly different to what you make in your kitchen when you're selling to your family and your friends. And what they can help you at this publicly funded technology facilities, they can help you not only figure out how to adjust your recipe, because obviously boiling 500 kilograms of sugar is not the same as doing it in your kitchen. And they can help you to adjust your recipe to make it compliant with the specifications and so on. So we have these capabilities. We have amazing capabilities, but it's not visible. It's not always visible. In that neighborhood there, people know about it. Anton and I, 2 years ago, we connected the Plastics Federation with a technology center in Durban that can do very advanced analysis of reinforcing of plastic structures. It's a facility that was created in partnership with some plastics manufacturers, but somewhere along the line, the center got busy with its own thing. And it got disconnected with improving the competitiveness of the plastics sector. Now, they are very happy. They're doing research, they're doing papers, they get every now and then an interesting research project. But until we change the way that kind of facility is measured or managed, we won't get that kind of center to step forward and say, we identify with the problems of all plastics manufacturers that are making advanced plastic structures. I love the question about the medical sector. Maybe another role for the public sector, which would be slightly different from the current role, is the public sector, but you could include big business. Big business and public sector have more in common than you would believe, is an advanced problem owner. So if one could say, this is the kind of problem that we have, and this is how much money it costs us, then and invite innovators to respond. And it's not just private sector innovators, it could be to also invite public sector innovators to come up with solutions that address those problems. So if you're an innovator and you walk in a public health facility, you see so many things that you think, if people that are innovative or creative or maybe just knew about this. So with water and in water management, again, the municipalities are advanced owners of problems. But it requires you to describe a problem. I don't want to say you need to always develop a specification, but I'm looking at him because I know he's also done a lot of work in this domain. But how can we get some of these problems quantified and then invite in companies to solve these problems? So in other countries, in the US and in Canada and a few countries in Europe, they have a program called the Small Business SBIR Innovation, where they even invite companies to bid to solve these problems. And then the public sector choose the best solutions and give companies contracts to implement their solutions. So it's a very different approach to the current public procurement approach, where you have to write the tender and then manage a very complicated public procurement thing. The last thing about Anton, about the creating an enabling environment, I would say that some of our companies are innovating and they are expanding. Even in our traditional sectors, in our sectors that are seen as old and uninnovative, we are seeing companies taking markets and launching out overseas. So maybe our policies are enabling for some, but not for others. So the question for me is, what policies do we need to get people to work together? And I do this kind of work in many different countries, and South Africa is one of the most difficult countries to get 20 businesses in the room to talk about technological change. It's really difficult to do that here. And maybe one of the reasons it is difficult is a lot of our companies are also really managing for the next year, where if you really wanted to innovate technologically, you need to think 3 or 4 or 5 years in advance. So maybe it's another way then, Anton, to contradict myself and to say, maybe our policies are not enabling medium-term innovation. And a lot of our companies and a lot of our public sector organizations are solving problems that are immediate and that's costing them money right now. So we're finding a lot of short-termism. I mean, I'm finding companies that are upgrading equipment, and you go there and they have the equipment shrink wrapped, still standing on a crate. And you ask them, why aren't you plugging in your new machine? And they would say, well, we have to make all these other investments before we can use our new machine. And you ask them, why did you buy the new machine? And they would say the old one broke and we couldn't fix it anymore. So our companies are upgrading, but it's not because they want to be more competitive. I think it's often, like you also said, the driver is often to save money and not to create new markets. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'll respond on the medical question and add to Shawn's comment, and also on the capability building part. I think just to emphasize again, so I mean, the medical space is a value chain. There's activities that you execute. I mean, I think benchmarking that against what should be happening becomes a starting point. And then the question is, which are the right technologies then to plug into to solve those issues? I'm not sure how well we are doing benchmarking to say, this is how a hospital should perform. I mean, if one is to get a little bit there in terms of the medical space, I mean, there are spaces that are understood in terms of, if you come in and you've got this issue, here's how it must flow, here's how is it flowing? Is it happening as it should? So I think that effort to understand how activities should happen, and I think other companies do that well. I mean, they pride themselves, I think the Amazons, they take a lot, they pride themselves that they get you a product within a particular time. And that's part of the KPIs, in terms of measuring themselves and performing against that. I think we need some level of that in the hospital space, especially in the things that are well defined. I understand when you go to much more like newer diseases where it has to be an iterative approach, but there are a number of other things that should be happening a lot more predictably and should be standard across a number of the hospitals. And I think we need to understand why we're not getting that right. The aspect of capability building that you raised, I think it also links to part of what I attempted to speak about. And really it comes down to a portfolio approach to innovation. So those 3 levels that I indicated should be happening all the time. And I want to bring your attention to this phrase called the golden investment ratio, where what the scholars argue, and I forgot their names, is that at each moment, you have 70% of your innovation investment on incremental and routine innovation. You have 20% of your investment on breakthrough or adjacent innovation, and you have 10% on radical innovation. And at each moment, when you look into the next year, there is an allocation for that. And continuously, you are making the investment, because if you stop making investment in the radical end, eventually what we are having is companies that have plateaued on a particular technology. And as I've indicated, they can't do anything to that technology. So it means we are trying, like, let's look at the sustainability space as an example. I mean, I was still young in the late 90s, early 2000s. But if we go back to 1977, the sustainable development conversation started then. But when are we making investments on this? We're actually doing them now, 30, 40 years later. So the reality is you are already not competitive by the time you try to make investment into the new thing. And I think moving into a space where companies make investment earlier on, and I think the innovation body of knowledge teaches us from a technology performance curve point of view that as you move to the end of the other technology, you start making investment into a new one. You start making investment into a new one. And I think that's something that we are not doing quite well and has caught us on a competitiveness front. Thank you.
Can I just add on just two aspects? One that Shawn, you were talking about on how companies are investing for the next year. One of the other things that maybe I might add there, I think it's also the inability of those companies to rely on the public sector 100%, because so even for them, if it's something that is outside their planning cycles and need to then work with government, then it becomes very difficult to then put those 5, 10-year plans in place. That's the first. But I think also on the medical side, for me, it will be also the absence of, the public good that, at some point government needs to provide, infrastructure, infrastructure for, let's say, clinical trials, those kinds of infrastructures. There are some that have been established, but again, Shawn talked about information dissemination. Some people don't know where they are. Those that know, there's limited access and things like that, but also aspects of legislative frameworks, standards, market access, especially from a public procurement point of view, then also becomes a limitation to make the industry thrive. Thank you.
Can I ask a question to the panel? We spoke about technological change, and if we are sitting here as representatives from firms or sectors, what are the checkpoints or the metrics that we can use as an indicator to say we are fit for technological change? So say we're sitting at the plastic sector. How can the plastic sector say we are change fit? We can handle change. How would you respond to that?
I don't know if I'm going to do justice to represent the plastics industry, but maybe one thing that we have to do with technological change, as I mentioned, I see technological change as many different things changing at the same time, which would mean that an ability for a firm or a group of firms or industry to not only have their development projects, like Randani said, maybe have a very nice portfolio, but to be able to change your plans on the fly as new capabilities or opportunities emerge. So the sectors that are doing well with technological change are the ones where when new capabilities become available, or maybe a little bit more in reach than they were a year or two ago, people can change their plans. Where in a very linear development process, you have a development project or improvement project rolled out over the next 3 years, and you almost try to protect your project against all kinds of changes. And those are the kinds of people that get disrupted. So that would be my first take on the fly, Beeuwen.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Okay. For me, Beeuwen, I would say, yes, it has to be the capability of that organization to do an ecosystem change, meaning that as you are introducing a new technology, or you are looking into this technological change, you are able to ask, I nearly said assess, measure, what is to assess, yes. Yes, yes. Now I'm thinking, when I wanted to say it and I thought, no, that's not the word. To assess what will be the effects. So what pressures will it bring to other aspects of the organization? And are you able to calculate that risk and mitigate that risk? So again, it goes to capabilities. Do you have capabilities to do those kinds of measurements and those foresights? Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Beeuwen, for an exam question on the spot. Right. But I think I want to apply the same lens that I use for the presentation. Right. So at level 1, efficiency innovation level, I want to check, which technologies, I mean, a number of technologies that you have introduced into the organization in the last year, in the last 3 years. I think that tells us that this organization, I like the word you use, the technological orientation, Shawn. Like this organization is an orientation towards pursuing technologies to drive its efficiency. I think for me, that's an important indicator that you want to track over time. The other piece then is, so there's introduction of technologies, that the technologies exist, you make adaptations. So I think introductions without adaptation. The next part is the technologies that you have adapted. So it means you are working with others, you bring in the technologies in, so you are collaborating. And we also want to know, I think part of the work that Naki did not long ago on the heterogeneity of firms had to do with, whether you bring in the technologies from others locally or internationally. You want to know how well is this firm networked and being able to bring technologies from abroad. Then the last indicator is you being able to develop the technology yourself. So I think that layer of introduction, adaptation, and internally developing, if we are continuously tracking those, we're able to see who is engaged. And I like this orientation phrase, because it means the organizations have an orientation towards engaging with technologies at different levels. So I think that's an interesting indicator, and I'll double check if we have it in our framework. The what you call it again? The organization framework that NACI uses at national level. It will be interesting to reflect on it from that view. Yeah. Thanks.
Would you like to make an input, Ms. Ntebu? Thank you. Can you please give us the question online, Gwen?
Hi, yes, with pleasure. I want to come in. One is a question, but the other is a perspective. I specialize in market access and traceability. Most of my focus at this stage is on the agricultural and food sector. I have a background in other areas, including mining, and that is formal mines and informal mines, such as diamond miners in different African parties. What we are looking at is an opportunity on the back of climate change that brings everybody together. So when we talk about this, discussion has been, how does an organization do it? If we look at the challenge that we are facing, if we look at the opportunities that we are facing, there are a couple of factors. One is it impacts on everybody. The other is that the rules have been changed. The other is that we have bought into those rules. If you look at the Paris Agreement, if you have a look at the fact that we have literally this month released our first global stock take, with the next one coming up in 5 years' time, that sets the parameters for a project. If we have a look at the need for a consistent approach to projects, we are not training people in project management. We are not training the youth in project management. And we expect one department to run a project when they don't have influence over another department. So that is another aspect to consider. And a key aspect comes into, we talk about skills development and we don't have the data. If we look at the data streams, if we have a look at the source of those streams, if we have a look at the conflict between expanding food production and the impact on biodiversity as an example, then we need to go down to community level. If we have a look at the focus on acknowledging Indigenous rights, we go down to community level. And if we have a look at technical extension services from the Department of Agriculture, the last figure I saw is something like one extension services officer to over 1,000 farmers. We haven't got a hope in hell with that ratio. So there's another opportunity. We have to radically change what we are doing. A lot of this planning is in place. A lot of the incubators are ready to move. It's beyond today's discussion. I want an interrupt and I'm very happy to take offline and extend the discussion.
Thank you very much, Gwen. I think we'll definitely take that offline, but I think there's an opportunity also from the panel members for a response as well.
Thank you, Gwen, for that perspective. I think what you have succeeded to do is just to show us or demonstrate how complex the ecosystem we're working under, like this the system that we're in, how complex and how many moving parts are there for even a government or a sector to consider. I think as Beeuwen is saying, yes, there is an opportunity for us to then expand the conversation, but also the one point that you made that also should be highlighted in this sitting is that resourcing, I talked about it as well, resourcing, especially human resources with capabilities, even in government space, has been a challenge in the past few years. So I don't know whether I'm shooting at myself in the foot, but it's something that we've been seeing that just to get feet on the ground to do the work has just been a challenge in terms of how heavy the public HR is on the fiscus. Thank you.
So Gwen, please leave your contact details with Daphne, and then we'll get in contact. So as we've stated before, this discussion is centered around manufacturing, but the mining and the carbon border adjustment and all those factors that you mentioned are definitely on the agenda. We just need to locate it in the right sphere, and then we can take that further. So thank you. We'll follow up on that. Are there any further online questions? Julia?
Julius van Dorf, South African Valve and Actuator Manufacturers Association under CIFSA. I just want to put to the panel two things. It's all good and well. We've got master plans for Africa in South Africa at the moment for different aspects, different sectors, etc., etc. And especially when it comes to technology, green technology, carbon footprint, carbon tax, all sorts of things that coming into play. One major shortfall that sort of I've observed is the lack of STEM programs in this country for our youth. There needs to be a much bigger focus, a lot more investment in those programs, because I mean that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's the young sort of skill set that we need, firstly, to drive this technology, because in the next 15, 20 years, some of the panel members, including myself, will probably be on pension. So these youngsters are going to be the ones that need to sort of drive that technology forward. That's number one. And in number two, the panel, I had to smile because we mentioned Komatsu, okay, and how that is made improvements, etc., etc. Once again, not a South African company, international group, massive market. They probably spend South Africa's GDP in their R&D, okay, which is definitely not what most South African local manufacturers can do. So I would like to see more South African success stories come into play when we sort of start doing our research and those type of examples, because we'll be country specific. And very important, like the DTIC member mentioned, you know, we've got this master plan. We've got one for the steel industry as well, funny enough. And, you know, it hasn't had great traction or great success, although they're all good plans. But unfortunately, you know, pulling the trigger and really getting going is where it gets interesting. And I agree, one of the panel members mentioned policies. We really need to look at our policies. It needs to be easier to do business in South Africa. It needs to be easier to do business with South Africa. Our young entrepreneurs and our young people and small SMEs need access to funding, okay? And there needs to be funding models that makes it easier, because just remember, a lot of these people do not come from previously advantaged backgrounds, okay? They're not going to have all the assets and everything to put down, but there still needs to be a way that they can access funding, because if you've got a solid business plan and you can show that initiative and drive, I think there's a lot of success stories we can write. Because one thing as South Africans, we've always been extremely innovative. We've come up with amazing things and developments. And even when we look at some of our sort of previous individuals that made it big on the international stages, those are South Africans. They started their journey here, and yet we sort of let a lot of that technology slip through our hands. And that's where also I think government needs to really look at their policy. And especially, I have a lot of dealings with the DTIC, so I deal with a lot of your colleagues that's responsible for my segment. And there needs to be a more streamlined approach so that we can grow the economy. We cannot survive on 1% growth. We need to get to at least 3.5% growth. Then we'll see the economy grow, businesses will grow, there will be more investment into this type of initiatives, definitely. There will be more money spent on research and development. And as businesses grow, we're definitely going to make a difference and an impact on the unemployment, which is almost unsustainable at this stage. So that's sort of what I would like to put to the panel as part of my observations with regards to this TIPS program that we're looking at the moment in this drive.
Thank you. Thank you, Julius, for the input. Any responses to Julius from CIPSA?
I will just one thing about the conditions. You know, I because I'm not a policymaker, so I'm not going to respond to all the conditions that we have to put in place, because we need better STEM, we need better lots of things. But the one thing that we have to work with is interested people. And so I work more at the level of getting people to work together, and there's endless potential there. I also happen to work in countries that have worse STEM and worse roads and worse electricity, and the people still innovate. So I hear Julius's point, and I hope the public officials make note of these comments. But actually what I would like to focus on is, and that photo that I showed of the foundry there, where a foundry management team involves workers without a very high qualification in problem solving in a very technical environment. So it's, you can still work with people even if they did not get a matric or a degree or a certificate. So I just don't want to now say that a precondition for innovation is that you have to have a STEM qualification. So I just want to put that out. But I hear Julius also, because when you get to exports and high performance technologies, then you would require people that can do more advanced calculations and quality control. Maybe another point that is just important for me, and again, it's at the level of work. I work mainly between public institutions, industry associations, and companies. And just one thing is, we cannot innovate on behalf of others. So of course, when the DSI and the DTI and the Department of Health and the Department of Digital Communications, when the public sector innovates, it has a huge spillover effect. So that aside, in most cases, we have to actually get the people that feel the pain, and the pain is very often in the pocket or in the inability to sustain their business in the long run. We have to get them involved. So it even goes to Gwen's comment about climate change. For a lot of our companies, they only really confronted climate change now with a carbon border adjustment mechanism. For some of our metals manufacturers, this is the closest that they've come to having to confront some of the challenges. And now suddenly manufacturers are very keen on figuring out, how do we get measures in place and how do we respond? But you can work with those manufacturers now, because now they are willing. 2 years ago, those same manufacturers were not interested because they were trying to save costs elsewhere. So just the point is, we cannot always, maybe that's then the right way of saying it, innovate on behalf of others. And it's also impossible for a sector association to work with all their members at once, because then I think the technology focus becomes too generic. So again, even in a sector or a subsector or a value chain, we have to find groups of companies or groups of actors, because it could be public and private, that are facing common pressures, and then we work with them around those. But to try and mobilize a whole sector and to get everybody to agree on what needs to be done is a little bit like running an election.
So can we just expand on that? Because my question is, how do we then establish, let's call it the coalition of the willing, the cow? How do we find these interest groups that are fit for technological change, and how do we scale that? Can we be practical around that?
Well, we can ask the team whether anybody's done it.
Yeah, so that's maybe the question is, who of you have kind of established a coalition of the willing around a specific case, be it increased innovation, increased competitiveness, or in this case, being fit for technological change, which is in other words, increased competitiveness. Yes, Saul.
And that's
I'm
when
looking at Antoine, and there was the French challenge, the competitiveness fund 25 years ago, as we're doing all of that. So we had done these things previously, and the first time I went to the Plastics Industry Federation was to look at, how the unions were there, industry was there, government was there, and there was a coalition of the willing to bring and support competitiveness in an industry that was facing major headwinds. I don't know if Anton wants to talk more about it, but there have been previous, and it was a while back, but yes. Some of us have long memories and one or two gray hairs. But but there has been a history of us doing this kind of thing. I don't know why we stopped doing things that work. Maybe the funding runs out. It was a funded program. But there are opportunities that I think we can look back and see how do we resuscitate them to, build on previous successes.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing that, Anton?
It was before my time, so I'm just great. I think part of the problem is, and if you look at the plastics industry, is predominantly SMMEs. So it's companies that doesn't have the capacity. It's very often family run, family owned. So the focus is to survive. In the current economic environment, the challenges, daily there's more taxes and more requirements and legislation that's coming in that companies have to comply with, that the technology orientation is not there. They're there for survival. They're focusing on the next day. So coming back to the fridge program, what happened? Well, the funding stopped. And being small companies, they don't have that sort of funds to make it work. So again, like the master plans, like IPAP, we have all the fancy policies, but at the end of the day, it's what does the industry contribute and how do they make it work? Small companies don't have that sort of funding. Even if you work together, it becomes IP and it becomes, Competitions Act regulations, and you're working with my competitor, trying to develop and grow the market. It becomes complex, becomes very difficult. So I think we are reactive very often to technological development. We don't really, even with the fridge program, and it worked well for a while, but funding was the issue, and how do you take it further the development? So the initial work that's been done, but it haven't been fast forward or enhanced further. So let me not talk too much more about the fridge study. I think so you're probably more up to date with what happened there. But how do we address the small companies? How do we make the economy viable? It's all sorts of things that needs to be aligned to make it work at the end of the day. So it's STEM, but it's more than STEM as well. There's a lot of willingness, but there also need to be incentives to drive it.
Any remarks, Ntombi? Yeah. Sorry, another hand in the room. Yeah, at the back, please. And online. Okay, whilst we're waiting, Gwen, it looks like Gwen again, please.
Yeah, just very quickly in terms of how to bring people together. If there's a common objective, and if we have a look again at the data dimension, this is a fourth wave of change from supply chain market access that I've experienced from a South African perspective. The first one was the early 80s, when we were coming out of sanctions and we needed to reopen the markets. The second one was the food safety story, which came through in the came through in the 90s, basically. The third one was when we got into chemicals and the whole organic story and everything else. We're now into the climate change. That aspect comes down to the entire supply chain, and there are cross-cutting aspects of that. Standardization, data sharing, and it's not easy. But as soon as we get the core group, I work on 5%, and we have got that 5%. When we get the core group and they show benefit, we move into a copycat sort of environment. Follow. A critical change over the last 15 years is that we used to get and apply for international funding, and we would get it. We are no longer getting that because we have not been doing the application, which is where tips could be very, very powerful and influential. The other consideration, given that we are now going, not just dealing with commercial entities, is sustainability needs to be business sustainability. And typically our research projects do not say, what will it take to develop the local capability to make it work? That is where, for instance, energy comes into it and lots of other things. But I just wanted to make the point that how do we get people together? You come back to a common vision. You come back to, we certainly have all of the triggers, we have the technology, we need the infrastructure, and that is information infrastructure as well. And we need to bring the youth through. And again, there are ways of making it digestible, making it affordable, making it accessible. I do represent at this stage, I'm a country ambassador for the Cambridge Democratizing Education, Global Sustainability in the Law, Global Justice in the Law. That is there. We've got everything we need. We need the leader organizations like TIPS who will say, what does it mean and how do we go forward to have some of those international engagements? I also have links in that respect from an information perspective. So just wanted to say we've done it before. We've done it several times, and thank you. We can do it.
Thank you, Gwen, for that very useful experience that you bring to the table. We'll definitely follow on.
Okay,
Thank
you, Beeuwen.
Ntombi,
Yes,
yeah, can we go towards closing off? So maybe Ntombi, the member in the panel, and then maybe a round of closing remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Beeuwen. Just like when my initial thinking when you were asking the questions, I thought of Mariana Mazzucato's missions, where you have a focus in terms of what needs to be delivered, and you have shared or mutual benefit. I feel like then in that manner, you are going to be able to bring in the coalition of the willing. But at the same time, when you consider the participation of small companies, that is where then what you call patient capital is required to protect those small firms and to assist them or enable them to thrive in that particular environment. Other than that, I am not sure, but I think I like what Gwen was saying, where there is mutual benefit, you are going to bring people, if people feel like they're benefiting from a certain agglomeration, they will stay in that room. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the member in the audience, please, you could just state maybe your name.
Hi, I am Nogwanda Masego. So I wanted to ask the question, isn't part of the failure to integrate technologies in businesses sort of the result of our failure as a country to integrate technologies into schools? Especially public schools where there's very limited technology access. And so I think part of what that does is limit the scope of technologies that students are exposed to until very later in life, where the thing that they're concerned about is getting an education and getting a job. And there's sort of minimal scope, especially in the context of this economy, to look into economic diversification, even technology diversification and integration, even in the scope of like small businesses, for example, where the goal is to sort of survive as a business. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can I ask each of the panel members to maybe close with a closing remark? And if you wish to respond to that input, you're welcome to, please. Thank you. Ntombi, can we start with you, please?
Nogwanda, I think you are correct that could be part of the problem, but I think on a bigger scale as well is the multiple demands on the fiscus and again focus, and I'll keep on hashing on this. If we lack focus in terms of what we need to drive and for a specific purpose, then we end up doing many things and they don't get to a particular end or fruition. So I think in closing, Beeuwen, I think one of the things that are pertinent for us to do is focus. When we make plans, we focus, we do a specific focus and we resource the plans adequately. Thank you.
Thank you.
For me, the key message that I would like to leave, and it also responds to the question about access to technology. One can now describe access to technology as a problem, or one can say, well, technology might also provide access to education. In both of those descriptions, we must refrain from thinking of technology just as a thing, because technology is also knowing how to do something. So if you think of a cup, or if you think of many of the technologies that you use every day, even using the road coming here, these are all technologies and they're all layered. So I just want to highlight, technology is not a thing. It's also knowing how to solve problems together. And that is for me the entry point, is to find out where do our businesses, and if we can, where do our businesses and the public organizations that they work with or that's supposed to support them, where are the problems that they can solve together? The problems like that they can solve by themselves, we would expect them to take those on. And that's a different set of challenges. But what are the problems that companies cannot solve for themselves? How can we get companies and their supporting networks, which could be public and private, to together have a future orientation so that we can start building beyond just solving short-term problems? Like Rendani said, to get people prepared for what is coming, and maybe for us to start creating what is coming. Thank you.
Thanks. I think for me, I think in terms of a wrap-up, Beeuwen, I think there's a greater element on, we need to work with these technologies to be able to understand understand them better. I mean, if I'm to make a personal reflection myself, I mean, when I came to West University in 2004 to study chemical engineering, I mean, I had no idea what I was even jumping into. And even the many years at Sasol, really, it's, I think the possibility and the opportunity for organizations to have access to technologies that they can work with, experiment and learn. So I think there is perhaps a greater need on this space of learning by doing, learning by using, learning by interacting, that we perhaps don't always elevate. That these technologies have to be available for us to use. And then when we use them, we tweak them. And maybe these spaces on experimentation spaces. And I think when we did work for the DSI now on the STA priorities on energy, one of the key discoveries when we scouted globally was the element of state labs being available as spaces to experiment and commercialize. When those things are available, apparently they improve the chances for commercialization. Thanks.
Thank you. So the discussion has highlighted that there are companies operating in enclaves. So there's an increasing need for a collaboration and coordination amongst firms and even at the government level. One of the audience online indicated that there's a lack of success stories, South African success stories. And I think there are South African success stories. And we also have to remember that we are operating within a global value chain. So Komatsu also is based in South Africa. Also, Bell Equipment is a South African company which has, as I indicated, launched a autonomous articulated dump truck. So this is one of the success stories of South Africa. There's also, I think, one of the things that we didn't highlight is unemployment. So within, and as it has been highlighted, technological change is not just only limited to the STEM. So there's an increasing need for learnerships in order to include other learners who could get employment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to thank each panel member for their preparation and input. It's been very insightful. I've learned a lot, especially around the topic of technological change, which I think is something that we do not necessarily reflect about in our daily lives. But it is quite an important concept because for me, it's a proxy of competitiveness. And I think it's something that we have to more intentionally manage and reflect of how we are doing as a sector on that. So that's the first point. The second one is, it was a really rich discussion. I appreciate all the inputs from the panel, of the audience, and also online. It's a pity that we didn't get to the topic of access, because I still would like to discuss how we get these technology intermediaries, people who can translate the user problem to the technical facility, to the science council, to the technical labs that are those intermediaries and help solving those problems. Maybe that's a topic for another day. I think there's another topic on climate change. So this is a rich forum. Thank you to TIPS for facilitating these development dialogues. It's a crucial function in our development of our national system of innovation, but also in the industrial policy dialogue. So thank you also for the privilege of being able to be part of it. Thank you all. Bye.